Hello and welcome to the Glowface Digital Wellbeing podcast. I am, of course, your host, David, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's podcast. Really excited to start having some more long form conversations about digital well-being. And I guess I wanted to let you know what to expect from the podcast moving forward. Really, a lot of what I share on other social media platforms is ideas driven, really practical tips to help you change your life with screens. But where I want to focus in on the podcast is more around ideas and concepts and really get to the heart of what's driving a lot of the need for change in our relationship with technology and in our relationship with screens in general. So hopefully these conversations will give you more of a mindset shift rather than simple practical tips to change your life with screens. But today's episode, I wanted to give you just a bit of a background as to who I am and why I decided to start this journey of the Glowface Digital Wellbeing company. And I guess really it goes back a long way. It goes back all the way back to when I was in kindergarten. In fact, even before that, I grew up in Sydney, and I spent a lot of time. Of course, my mum worked from was a stay at home mum, and would spend a lot of time with her before I went to kindergarten, and she noticed in me that I was pretty clever when it came to maths, and now every parent thinks their kid is pretty clever, and that's understandable, but I did seem to be a little bit different. I was sort of 3 and 4 years old, and I was making comparisons between the age of myself and my older brother, who's 2 years older than me. I would, 3 years old, I'd tell my mum that when I'm 31, my brother will be 33, which is a pretty interesting thing for a 3-year-old to come up with. And so I, progressed with my mum, and I seemed to have an aptitude for numbers. And then I got to kindergarten, and this whole idea of 1 + 1 = 2 just was a little bit boring for me. And so I remember in kindergarten, I was given these sort of 8 and 12-sided die, and I was 5 or 6 years old at the time, and the teacher asked me to roll the dice and multiply the numbers together. So I sort of went ahead and did that. I rolled the dice, and I would times the numbers together as a 6-year-old, which was already pretty, again, a little bit different. Not sort of too much horny, it just gives some context on what life was like for me. I showed the teacher all the multiplications I did as a 6-year-old, and she would say, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's good." She'd check it, mark it, have to get the calculator out to check my answers, and she would sort of send me back on my way to do some more maths when the other kids were sitting there in the front, learning about simple addition and subtraction. That sort of carried on through the first couple of years of my school life. But then around year 2, my mum pulled us out of school and actually took us, started homeschooling us, which sort of maybe you're starting to think, oh, well, that's kind of why he's all against screens and technology. But I guess we weren't your sort of typical, homeschoolers. We lived on a farm, or raised our own chickens, or we did have a vegetable patch, but that's besides the point. We were pretty normal kids, I think. In fact, ironically, we actually literally lived next door to a public school. So for 8 years of my life, I was homeschooled from, I think it was 8 years, roughly. See, I'm not good at any maths anymore. I'm not any good at maths anymore. We were homeschooled from year 2, and I went back to high school in year 8. So, I think I got taken out at 8 years. I went back to high school when I was 14, so 6 years, excuse the maths there, but 6 years of my life was homeschooled. And then I kind of, went through this process of doing homeschooling and found myself back at school in year 8, and then found myself back in math class, effectively just doing what everyone else was doing, which was a different experience for me because I'd spent those couple of years in primary school, pretty well ahead of most everyone else, pretty well used to doing my own thing. And then coming back into, year 8 maths, like I had a little bit of an aptitude for mathematics, but there was no way the teacher was going to, give me my own work or let me do my own work by myself. I was following the curriculum. I was doing what everyone else was doing. And I guess I sort of progressed through high school and went to university, and again, nothing special, pretty basic finance degree, found myself in a corporate job, and then in my 20s really started to reflect on that experience as a kid. Like, clearly I had a little bit of a natural talent for maths. It was kind of maybe even my God-given gift. I think everyone's got something that they're better at than other things. For example, I'm terrible at drawing, terrible at painting, anything sort of artwork related. My 4-year-old can draw and color in better than I can, just already. And so it's definitely not a natural talent that I possessed, but maths was clearly my natural talent. But by the time I'd gotten back to school at 14 years old, my natural talent had sort of disappeared, had gone. In a way, it was almost sort of taken from me without me even realizing it. And as I reflected on that experience, it started to dawn on me what was quite integral part of my childhood. And that was the time I spent in front of a computer, and that was the time I spent in front of a TV, the time I spent in front of a screen. I was born in 1992, so there you go, you can figure out my age. I'm 31 years old right now. But in the 90s, although there were some computer games, like basic ones back in the 80s, in the 90s was really the boom of the console-based games, or computer games, console-based games that you could plug into the TV and play things like Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, PlayStation was released, Xbox was, I think, the early 2000s as well. All these sort of console-based entertainment gaming systems were released then, and I tell you what, I consumed all of it. I played tons of Nintendo 64, Pokemon on that. I played Pokemon on Game Boy. Game Boy was released during that time as well. I played heaps of Xbox. My brother actually got our Xbox, had a computer chip put in it where you could go to the video game store, take the game, like the video store. You remember like Video Easy or Blockbuster and those sort of stores. And you could rent the game, and you could then load it into your Xbox, and you'd have it forever, which is a bit of a cheap way of getting a hold of a game. But that means we had 100 games that we could play on our Xbox at any given time. But I consumed all of these games over and over and over again, and but then I also played a lot of computer-based games. For anyone who grew up during that time, Age of Empires, I'm sure you have heard of it. I'm sure you played it. Counter-Strike, again, I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm sure you played it. But the thing that took my attention the most was a game called Guild Wars. And I was absolutely obsessed with this game for about, 3 or 4 or 5 years. And it really did extend well into my 20s as well. And I spent, I think at some stage, there was like a 2 or 3 year period there where I would do 2 hours every single day on that computer game, which is an unfathomable amount of time. Now I say that as a 31-year-old father of 2, to spend 2 hours on a computer game. And I ended up spending, easily what would amount to 10,000 hours of my childhood and teenage life, either playing computer games or watching TV. I loved to watch TV, loved watching Dragon Ball Z, loved watching Pokemon, any of these sort of TV shows that would come on. Loved watching them, loved watching Sports Center, and then as I sort of grow a bit older. But when you combine the amount of time I spent on computer games with the time I spent on Xbox and PlayStation with the time I spent watching TV, I easily would have hit a 10,000 hour mark. Now, why do I mention this 10,000 hour mark? Well, there's this whole idea that if you spend 10,000 hours on one thing, you get to become an expert at it, right? It takes 10,000 hours to become a master chef or magician or musician, whatever it is. You get 10,000 hours to, if you spend 10,000 hours practicing that thing, you will become an expert and you'll get really good at it. And I think a lot of people get to spend their 10,000 hours working on the thing that they're naturally talented at. Maybe they're talented at soccer, or naturally talented at playing instruments, or naturally talented, at maths, for example, and they get to spend 10,000 hours working on that craft. And I realized when I came across this theory and I've reflected back on my time that I'd spent my 10,000 hours not on maths, not on my natural talent, but on computer games. I spent 10,000 hours staring at a screen instead of being able to deploy my natural talent into the world and do perhaps what would make me feel most fulfilled. And as I sat in a corporate job, spending all my days just sitting there answering emails, taking phone calls, pretty boring stuff, I started to become really disenchanted with the whole process, and the whole idea around chasing your dreams started to play in my mind. And I quit my job. I went and tried to be a personal trainer and ran a gym, and that failed. And I went to a smaller business, and I didn't enjoy my time there much either. And then now I'm sort of back in a corporate world, and it's a bit easier to tolerate these days because I've got family and kids to take care of, and that's a responsibility, and that's important that I honour that responsibility. Absolutely intend to do so, but I digress there. I'm just sort of giving you an idea that really, I found myself wondering why, in fact, I'd spent that time and how that decision was made. And I guess it really wasn't a decision. I never made the decision to trade 10,000 hours of my life, spending it on screens, having fun, of course, but instead of that, I could have spent it on becoming a better mathematician and perhaps found myself in a career that was more rewarding or more fulfilling and something that I felt that I was more naturally inclined to do. So I started on this journey of understanding, what is it about screens that draws us in? What is it about our phones that holds our attention so well? Why do people end up like I did? And I'm sure I wasn't the first person who kind of woke up after 10,000 hours in a job they didn't like. What the hell just happened in the last 20 years of my life? I'm sure there's millions of people who who can resonate with my story to say, well, hey, actually, I was really good at, whatever it was when I was a kid, but then all of a sudden as a teenager, that talent was gone. And then I just found myself in a job I didn't like in my 20s. And here I am with a mortgage and I'm sort of stuck. What happened? And I think what happened was screens. What happened was we spent our 10,000 hours in the wrong way. And what I hope to do through Glowface Digital Wellbeing is change that for some people, change that particularly for kids. I think about like kids who don't get the chance to make this choice. A lot of them are just given an iPad or given a phone at a young age and sent on their way and not taught how to deal with these devices, predominantly because most people don't know how to work well with them, how to manage them, how to integrate them healthily into their daily lives. And they end up spending 5, 6, 7 hours a day just on their phone, which sort of it's just an incredible amount of time. And very quickly, these kids are going to hit 10,000 hours on these devices, and they're going to wonder what the hell just happened. And then they're going to grow up and take on responsibilities that are going to feel uncomfortable because they found themselves in jobs that they aren't fulfilled in because they spent their lives staring at a screen. So what I really hope to do through Glowface Digital Wellbeing is just introduce some ideas to people to help change that potential outcome for a bunch of kids. Also, introduce some ideas to those who are older, those in my generation who grew up with screens, grew up with computer games like we did. Help them understand what might have just happened, but also how do you make a change moving forward? There's still a lot of life left to live for a lot of us, and there's still a lot of opportunities to put down our phones, put away the screens, and start to reclaim our lives. And that's what I really hope that Glowface Digital Wellbeing can bring to a lot of people, is really practical ideas on how to take your life back from screens. Of course, there's the book that allows people to dive deeper into these ideas and concepts, and I'll bring a lot of those ideas from the book to the podcast. There's the course that really gives people practical tips to change their lives in screens in 10 days and really gets into the implementation of those ideas. But hopefully the content I put out there just on a broad basis will be able to inspire people to make these changes with screens and help them, ensure that their kids don't end up, perhaps like I did or in the same spot that they are, having spent 10,000 hours in the wrong way. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to today's podcast. Podcasts will come out on a weekly basis, and you can expect to hear again from me same time next week. Thanks so much.